Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia Arend, and I'm a senior analyst at the Global Blockchain Business Council. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's episode of the Global Blockchain Business Council and Global Digital Finance's Global Leaders Series, a weekly global town hall with policymakers and business leaders to hear their insights into their work, the emerging COVID-19 crisis, and field questions from members of the community. Today, we are joined by David Treat, Senior Managing Director at Accenture, Global Lead of Accenture's Blockchain Business, Global Capital Markets Technology Lead, and Accenture's lead of the New York FinTech Innovation Lab. Dave has over 20 years experience in financial services, split between consulting and industry roles spanning capital markets and banking. Over the past several years, Dave has driven the formation of Accenture's blockchain business globally. Dave serves on numerous boards, including the Linux Hyperledger Project, the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, the Global Blockchain Business Council, and the ID 2020 Alliance. He is also the project director for the Digital Dollar Project and a member of the World Economic Forum's Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Global Blockchain Council. Dave holds over 26 blockchain patents and pending patents, and he is a frequent speaker. He has also been quoted extensively on blockchain-related topics in the New York Times, Fortune, Financial Times, and Wall Street Journal. Dave was also named one of the SciTech 100 Architects of the Future by Silicon Republic. And today our host is GBBC CEO and GDF board member, Sandra Rowe. In addition to the GBBC and GDF, Sandra holds directorships as well as co-founded and advises and angel invests in several emerging tech startups across a range of industries and technologies, including blockchain and robotics. She has served as treasurer and founding board member of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance and founding member of the Post-Trade Distributed Ledger Group and the Linux Foundation's Hyperledger. Previously, Sandra was executive director for digitization at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, where she was responsible for the company's digital asset and distributed ledger technology initiatives, including CME, Bitcoin futures, and index pricing products. We welcome your questions at any point during today's webinar and ask that you submit them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Without further ado, I will hand things over to our host and guest. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Sophia. And it is a great pleasure to welcome Dave, albeit virtually, to have a chat with us for the next hour about his thoughts around blockchain and where we are going, where we are now, where we are going. And without further ado, I'd love for Dave to say hello to everyone here. Thank you for joining us and give your thoughts at a macro level. What are you seeing? What do you think, where the state of affairs are? What gets you most excited?
Awesome. Thanks, Sophia. Thanks, Sandra. I'm on some level. I'm still smirking at the before and after picture of the tile slide of me pre and post COVID. I'm certainly a little heavier and a little hairier, but I'm thrilled to be here. I suppose at a top line message level, I'm choosing to be incredibly positive at this point because I think there's some tremendous silver linings in terms of what's happening. Of course, there's all sorts of just horrendous challenges that we face and some dire consequences. But to just to keep a positive light on it, and think about some of the silver linings. I do see a massive acceleration of what we're all collectively working to accomplish in terms of this wave of innovation and what it's driving. At a fundamental level, look, all of the focus now around how do we get back to work, how do countries think about travel and borders and the like, the whole notion of digital identity and self-managed identity as one of the core aspects of what this technology unlocks and enables is now massively in play, and we're seeing a huge acceleration of interest in digital health credentials and how to do them, how to apply them effectively. We can get into some interesting dialogue around around the policy choices and the implications and the safety and the privacy aspects balanced with the potential to really help. We're seeing massive interest in financial infrastructure. I think in stark differences to the 2008 crisis, right? The banks are in a different position. We've got governments from a benefits distribution perspective doing unprecedented things. They're doing them and in ways that, again, I think it's hard to be effective now in the days and weeks. but in the months and quarters, what again, our wave of innovative technology is driving is coming into frame and is going to is accelerating and providing, I think, great opportunities. And then, sorry, what the third macro level statement I would make is, from a supply chain perspective, the whole notion of how do we recognize areas of oversupply, recognize areas of undersupply and need, have that auditability, transparency, control, the ability to redirect supply chains, understand them better, again, is at the core of what we're doing. And so I think across those three dimensions, I'm incredibly optimistic that that a big silver lining coming out of this this crisis in this context is an acceleration of our space.
Well, I certainly appreciate your optimistic view on the world, because I think we've got plenty to be pretty down and out about. But having said that, I really appreciate the fact that you've dissected three major buckets that I'd really like to hone in on today. So let's start with digital identity, because I think there's a view, particularly in the US, that if we actually had a more cohesive national digital identity solution, tracking and tracing, contact tracing, these sort of things would actually be quite beneficial for having that kind of system, but we don't. And so what can we do today? Where do you see the major players? How do we get there? Do we not get there? What are some of the concerns? What do we need to watch out for, especially in a world of increasing surveillance? And personally, I find, I'm looking with caution and a bit of fear that we start dipping into data privacy, serious data privacy issues.
Yeah, and that caution and fear is well founded, and has to be at the heart of how we carry forward. I and the team, I've got a phenomenal team focused on digital identity globally, led by a woman named Christine Leong, and supported by a phenomenal team that is now just absolutely slammed with engaging in what the tech can do, in the policy choices and the practical dimensions of how to press forward. I think what's incredibly important is to segregate, bifurcate the conversation into its component parts, because when you start to, we're seeing when you have people, and I guess maybe most dangerously, when stakeholders and leaders that are in this space aren't fully up the learning curve, we're having a mix of, we're having too much of a mix of understanding. We're talking past each other. We're using inadequate language in many respects. The first thing that I think freaked me out was the rush, the rush to, the notion of an immunity passport, or pick your derivatives of the same topic.
Yeah.
Right. That notion, I'll talk about what it's evolved into in a very healthy way, but the initial notion, I think, was incredibly dangerous. Was if we created an ability for any of us in whatever format to be able to have some sort of attestation that says that we had had the virus and we're now immune, the knock-on effect that would have for all of the people that are desperate to get back to work. I harken back to like my childhood when one of our friend group got the chicken pox, right? We suddenly there were play dates because let's get it out of the way, so we could get on with things. That would have been disastrous in the current context, right? If we had rushed into a tech implementation to say, look, you can get an immunity certificate or passport or context, all of the curve flattening activities would have been incredibly hampered, because people would have rushed to want to get back to work, or there would have been too much of that dynamic. And so that has given way to I think much more thoughtful dialogue around the entire risk profile, and how do we take the capabilities that the technology can create around all of us being able to self-manage a set of attested information about ourselves. The self-managed part of it being incredibly important in terms of with whom do we choose to share what, and do we retain control over that as what I believe has to be a fundamental tenet of how we carry forward. And if we have that ability for us to be in control of what we share with whom for how long, and the ability to revoke, which is all there now. The ability then to have a risk model that then the stakeholders, those that need to evaluate that information to help guide us through our lives, whether it's returning to work or crossing a border or traveling, et cetera, having a robust risk model that then is used to then guide our behaviors and put the necessary risk management in place around it. That's where we're headed. I think it's turned into a much more healthy dialogue and a much more sophisticated one. It won't be perfect, and I guess that's the other dimension of this is I think there are pros and cons to this statement, massive ones, but I do think we're in a period that is affording us more leeway about effectiveness over perfection, and to be able to try and test and learn. And the downside of that is obviously some dire consequences for getting things wrong. But the environment right now is very open to accelerating that pace of innovation and accelerating the how do we actually make this work. And so I'm positive about that environment. Obviously, very, very concerned and fearful for the unintended consequences and the ability to control that we don't create more problems than we're trying to fix.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a very valid point. When we think about the way the U.S. works, which a lot of it is at the state level, do you think we'll have to rely on things like DMV identification for verification? Like at a very practical level for the layman, let's lay out, or the layperson, like me, let's lay out what I would do to get a digital identity in a world where this could be done in a way that is secure, that allows me control. Because I think this is important and I think it's coming. But the question is, how are we going to make it happen in a way that works? Which will include potentially the attestations that you talked about for COVID, but also it has implications far reaching than that.
Yeah, so if I break it into its parts, right, there's the core technical platforms, right, which I think I'm incredibly pleased as I look back over the past couple of years, the rallying around standards, right, DIF, W3C, somewhat, I'll be somewhat biased, right? In terms of sitting on the Linux Hyperledger project board, we're basing all of our work around Indy giving way to Aries over time and how they work together. The whole notion of all of us rallying around interoperable standards and platforms that can, have the multi-stakeholder group providing all of the necessary inputs from the different fields of expertise. I'm incredibly confident that we're actually building a core solution base that's open source and effective as a base technology capability. Obviously, the important part is how does that get then mapped into a context and the policy choices around it. So to your question around how does it actually work, the language I've been using for a while now is this notion of islands of implementation. We're going to have discrete pockets of implementations that, if they're all built to interoperable standards and ideally the same open source platforms that are architected to work together, as we have different islands of implementation go live. Right. As a human traverses the context of those islands of implementation and can build more and more of those set of attested credentials, it all starts to work. And so right now, up to the point of the pandemic, we had some specific ones in travel, right? Our work with Canada and the Netherlands on KTDI with the World Economic Forum. We had some in banking. We had some in supply chain. The islands were starting to emerge. I think now with the pandemic, we've got some massive new islands, potential very big islands, right, with governments jumping in wholesale. And I agree with you. I think I think the states' purviews in this in a U.S. context are incredibly important. I think you're spot on that the whether it's DMV, nationally CBP, all the if I make it more global, right? The national identity dialogue combined driven by border control and benefits distribution primarily in the moment, combined with the health industry, financial services industry, I only see these islands growing faster.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about KTDI, just because that is a really interesting project, which really does put control back into the hands of the traveler and is GDPR compliant. So if you don't mind explaining what KTDI is.
Sure.
I mess up that acronym.
No, sure. It's so this is a collaboration between it's the World Economic Forum and Accenture and the governments of Canada and the Netherlands, Schiphol Airport, Toronto Montreal Airport, KLM Airlines, Air Canada is like the active core group, and then there's a wider group of other travel industry representatives, hotels, other countries, other airports, and it will expand over time. It's really one of my favorite examples now, where we've gotten so far as to get governmental comfort and approval of the use of a self-managed identity construct. It's built on Indy, to be able to and the use case, the entry point use case is and obviously, sorry, had we had this conversation 6 months ago, I would have given you all the stats about how rapidly the travel industry is growing and the flight patterns.
Yes,
hopefully we get back to that.
The world has changed.
Safely and quickly. But the use case is, today you and I book a flight. In this case, if we book a flight from Montreal to Amsterdam, we book the flight, and then. Ultimately, once we board the plane, we arrive on the other side, we show up, and see the border control agent. It's in today's world, no matter what, you're in some respects, you're surprising the agent when you show up, right? You walk up the desk and you're in a transactional exchange of a credential, a decision, they swipe it, a decision point, a transactional decision point, and then they let you in or they don't, right? But the data has been available and could be processed far in advance of that. And that's what, with the use of self-managed identity in this context, drives, is you and I I'm sitting on my couch, I book my flight, I can send my attested credentials that are necessary to cross that border, for them to make the decision about me, whether I should be able to cross that border, far in advance. I send my credentials in advance. I'm sending the approval for them to also use my biometric information, and ideally then after I take my flight, I arrive on the other side through the combination of that pre-approved attested credential verification and a biometric. I simply walk through. This is an entry point use case. It's very relevant for the border control agencies and the governments because of the demands on the travel system are just were growing enormously. I think we will get back to that point, but then extend that out, right, to the entire travel experience, right? As I think about the hyper personalized service that I could get if I pick and choose the aspects of my attested credentials that I want to share with my hotel, with the car service, with the with a hospital in case I get in trouble, health-wise, et cetera. My ability to intentionally share that information about me in a tested form so that they can give me hyper-personalized service, and it can be time limited and I can revoke it later. It's that degree of control that we think is going to be incredibly impactful. And so a border crossing's the entry point. It'll grow from there.
So if I take that example and just pivot a little bit, we talk a lot about digital identity as in people, which absolutely should be on the forefront. But what about things, identity of things? Like, could we apply the same concept to tracking things effectively?
Yeah, so we do. Yeah, we don't only focus on people. We focus on things, and then I'll add to that also digital actors. right? The whole notion of the advancements of, sorry, I tell a funny story, right? My kids hear me talk, as I work from home, frequently. And at one point I talked about the, pick your, between Siri, Alexa, Google Home, right?
Right.
The digital presence in our households and the ability to connect it to, to financial services, right? The entitlements that I would give to a digital actor acting on my behalf, it would be very important that my 10-year-old couldn't walk up to Alexa and say, transfer $1,000 to my account, right? So luckily, you need to have voice recognition. You have to have the entitlements. You have to be able to empower a digital actor with the entitlements that you want to give it as an extension of your identity, as it works in the world. If I go back to your things topic, right, this is a huge topic in the IoT space, as we've been talking for a while about, our refrigerator ordering goods on our behalf, and our home plants, HVAC system, or the various smart devices, smart meters, their ability to order service on your behalf, pay for it automatically. All of these things are extensions of our identity, and will benefit from the same construct. In a more recent dynamic, we helped to support the MOBI consortium, and helped with the vehicle ID standard, right, of the identity of cars. And sorry, if anyone wants to get into why a VIN doesn't do it, it's an interesting, it was an interesting lesson for me. But yeah, so the identity of people, groups of people, things, and digital actors working on our behalf are all in play, and fortunately all can be based off of the same underlying technology, each with their own nuances, of course.
I have to take that in for a moment. It is a bit mind-blowing to think that we are reorganizing and shaping interactions in the digital world this way.
Yeah, I mean, if I get a little philosophical about it, right? I think the notion of what there's a piece that we're going to publish soon. I think the notion of what a winning digital business is in the next phase fundamentally changes from what it has been. Right, in the current phase, a winning digital business was the one who could accumulate the most data they possibly could from wherever they could get it, and then they use machine learning and to be able to derive insights through that, what is very often second, third, fourth hand data and derived information. I think particularly in this current context, the company that can create the most trusted relationship with their customers and counterparties, even competitors, the stakeholders in an ecosystem, and use the combination of capabilities available to us to directly and intentionally share the information in a very controlled manner, and to be able to always know you're looking at the golden source of that piece of information, and to be able to revoke access. And I think that whole notion of changing the nature of how information is shared between B2C, C2C, B2B, dynamics is what will define the winning digital business in the next period.
I'm not sure, this is more of a comment than a question, but obviously someone mentioned here about voice artificial intelligence, and that's obviously a component of a confluence of things that are occurring. In terms of voice, how much work are you guys doing in the context of identity and blockchain and IoT?
Yeah, so we again under Christine, I think we've done something brilliant in that we have co-located in the same team our biometrics and our digital identity work, because they are so interrelated. And we've got a guy on our team named Dan Backenheimer who sits on a lot of the standards boards, actually a shocking number of the standards boards, helping to write the standards about this. So it's a huge focus for us. And I guess again, the headline message around it is, unless you can definitively associate the human with the identity, we've only created, we've generally created more problems than we've solved, right? You have to be able to definitively link the human to the identity or the thing, and device. So that interplay between biometrics and digital identity is absolutely crucial.
And then we're going to move on to central bank digital currency, but one more final question that's here regarding enterprise. Do you think enterprises are focusing enough on identity, whether they have enterprise customers or whether they have consumers, individuals as customers? Do you feel like enterprises have challenges or obstacles that they are impeding them from really getting into the digital identity or embracing digital identity?
I think there's been a huge change over the past year. I think there's been a big acceleration. I think that there's been an ascendancy of the learning curve. I think some of the big players in the space are now jumping in, and I think that's going to drive it further and faster. So no, I don't think there's. At this point, I think there's more. There's better understanding of the value pools, and there's more motivation. I see less on the hindrance side. I think our major hindrance in this space was really the learning curve and education around what's possible. I'm seeing now that companies and the platform providers that will be key in the space, now that they're engaging, I think we're going to see it move much faster.
And then government versus enterprise, who drives this on the digital identity side, or is it both? Do we need both?
Yeah, it's absolutely a both dynamic. I'm immediately channeling Chris Giancarlo, who's my partner, and we're working together on the Digital Dollar project, which I know we'll get to in a minute. Chris has a great talk track around the varying regions of the world's approach to innovation and how it works. And his comment about the U.S., right, and North America in general is we've always innovated on a public-private construct, right? It's always been a combo of public-private to make it work. And the commercial innovation and investment and focus and the advancement of the governmental priorities and policies when it's all worked right. I see that's what's happening now, right? I'm spending a lot of time on Capitol Hill. There's real engagement, and so hopefully, I think it will play out that way as a real public-private partnership. Other countries, other regions have different ways of innovating and implementing, and all of those have evolved because of what works for that particular societal governmental context. So it'll play out differently in different parts of the world.
Well, great. And now that you've mentioned digital dollar, we have to talk about digital dollar. And by the way, I just want to give a thanks to, and I apologize if I say your name wrong, Novak, for all the questions, and for thanking you, Dave, for participating. Michael, thank you for the shout out, and he wants to talk about digital dollars. So let's open the floor to central bank digital currency.
Yeah, we're incredibly excited about this. In every funny sort of way. Sorry, I'll try to do that. Maybe I'll do that. I'm going to give you a short version. When we recognized that blockchain was going to be client relevant enough to start to build a business around it. This was about 5 years ago now. It had lived in our labs process for years before that, doing applied research. Our very first project was with a central bank. And so and it was very quiet, and of course central banks necessarily need to be very conservative, given their role and the tone and the precedent that they set for their financial ecosystem. We've been working with central banks for like I said, for 5 years now, very quietly in the background. And it started with research, and there've been some prototyping activities, et cetera. But obviously, as of 10 months ago, 11 months ago, with the Libra announcement and with China's announcements around their priorities around it, and then everything that's happened subsequent to that, the intensity level around recognizing the potential of the technology, the potential of this use of it has just been unreal. And so we've been investing into this space for a long time. We're really pleased to now see that those investments starting to pay off, and some of the real building starting to happen. So let me maybe start with some definitional aspects. So what we're talking about here is by and large, and all of this is to be tested in the coming months. So I'm not giving you an answer per se. I'm giving you kind of the going in principles. But the notion is of taking what we all learned and developed and have been using around, initially cryptocurrency and giving way to stable coins and or evolving with stablecoin capabilities. What has always been the potential is to have fiat currency in a tokenized form. And I guess the simplest way to think about it, of course, is if I take a dollar bill out of my wallet, that dollar is a dollar no matter the context. It doesn't matter where I take it. It doesn't matter, if as long as I keep it intact, it will always represent a dollar, not anything more or less. I was with Ken Rogoff gave a great talk at Davos, I think the year before last, and talked about the fundamental difference between, I'm gonna butcher and paraphrase here, but the fundamental difference between stable coins, by definition, are a pegged instrument, and pegged instruments always run the risk over time of suffering from the context, right? Who's issuing it? What's their context? What's the nature of the peg? And there's always a challenge around a pegged instrument. If we create a tokenized version of a fiat currency issued by a central bank, its survivability across any context it would adopt those characteristics of it would always equal a dollar. Mm-hmm. And that's fundamentally different and valuable. We actually see a tremendous interplay between the notion of a central bank digital currency and a stablecoin, because one of the other principles that we apply is that it would be unrealistic, or I think it would be counter to the principles of the roles that people play, is that to have the notion of the programmable nature of a token, to be able to add business logic to the token, mm-hmm. Having that reside within a central bank digital currency, that gets them into a game that I don't think any of us would anticipate them getting into. So to be able to have stable coins be the purview of private commercial enterprise, to be able to take advantage of embedding business logic into the tokenization of value, pegged to a central bank digital currency where it's always equal to in this case the dollar, that's a very powerful combination. And maybe I should have started this whole thing by basically saying, look, from an innovation life cycle perspective, the value here is that we've just assumed since the 1950s, and we've built up this digital world, we've assumed that the cash movement has to somehow move on a separate basis than the online interaction. And to be able to bring these two things together and have the exchange of value be as simple as our exchanging of photos or text messages is too valuable for it not to happen. The question is the journey as to how we get there.
Right. And there are a lot of questions here around various aspects of this. So I'm going to start trying to unpack one piece at a time. So you've got one question here. Digital dollar, central or decentralized? Being that it's coming from a centralized government.
Yeah, that'll be that's it. So there is no, again, to be tested in terms of how it plays out. And sorry, I'm trying to decide how deep to go here. One of the going in principles that's being applied is to maintain the two-tier banking system, in terms of having the central bank be the ones to mint these tokens. We're adding a third form of money, right? You've got physical paper and coin, you've got account-based money, and now this would be a third form of money, distributing it through the existing two-tier banking system. And then deciding, how far it goes in terms of its end points. And so there's a choice around, how far the distribution goes. And what's really important is to put this in the context of the use cases for which this is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
As I talk to my parents, right, who have finally learned how to, through their banking app, through Zelle, right, they can send money instantly. For them, send money to their grandkids instantly. That use case, not impactful, right? From an end user perspective. Now, you could argue behind the scenes there are multiple messages that happen, and then the efficiency of it. But what is often conflated here is that a central bank digital currency is the panacea for all financial transactions. And while it will evolve in its importance and maturity over time, it doesn't replace the other two forms of money. It adds a third option. So sorry, I got away from the original question, but the whole notion of central bank digital currency is, yes, it is in order to have the full faith and backing of the central bank and to be a part of the systemic financial system of a country and its sovereign money. Yes, the operators of that network will need to be fully permissioned, onboarded, controlled, audited. You want to have the full confidence in that system as we have put into the existing financial infrastructure.
So you mentioned before about there being three different categories of quote unquote money, the cash, the coins, and in a COVID world, it looks like the acceleration of the disappearance or the reduced usage of cash and coins is accelerating. And I'm not terribly against that either, actually, as a concept, but central bank digital currency isn't necessarily the answer because it needs to meet certain requirements that cash actually does quite well, which is I give you $5. I don't know what you do with it. And frankly, I don't care. You don't know where I did with it or where I got it from. And I don't really care to tell you. I just know that I owe you $5 and I just gave it to you. How do we, one, do low-level transactions like that at minimal friction and cost? And then how do we also keep the tracking away from, surveillance as a surveillance mechanism?
Yeah, so this is one of the advantages, sorry, I'm not on a relative basis, but let's just focus on the U.S. for a minute, right? One of the advantages of the constitutional protections, in the Fourth Amendment around government intrusion, right? Having this be the purview of the Fed and Treasury, and is run by the central bank. Actually, there's a constitutional limitation then on the access to that information, and you would have to have due process to be able to gain access to it. So kind of put that as the headline, right? It would be created within the context of a constitutionally limited data access construct that we've been working within for quite a while. At the other end of the spectrum, you're dead on in that the technology itself offers capabilities to be able to have that history and an abundance of data. And so what's incredibly important right from the start is to build this with the privacy and auditability, controllability on one hand, right? You start with the privacy by design. But at the same time, the construct, the platform itself will need to be able to adhere to AML KYC regulation and to be able to trigger when information should be shared and for what purpose. And those policy choices and are going to be, I think, some of the most interesting, around the designs of how this plays out. I think different countries will do it differently. I think in the U.S., I think those base standards won't change. And I do get you were very right in your example of keeping it to small dollar transactions, because of course what's not often talked about is, of course, if you follow the rules, if you go above that $10,000 mark, right, you are then you're meant to then be subject to that surveillance. So yes, I guess long-winded way of saying, as part of the design, we are preserving and protecting that privacy for small dollar transactions in adherence to current legal and regulatory constructs. as one of the core tenets of what would get built, all to be tested and be part of the key policy discussions over the coming months.
Do you think that a digital dollar or a digital, any fiat currency, take your pick, is valuable to those who do not have bank accounts, who could have a digital wallet, who certainly, for the most part, have access to a phone, if not a phone themselves, around the world? Do you think this is a stopgap for financial inclusion? And when I talk about financial inclusion, I just mean the ability to have financial services accessible to you in a cheap and fair manner. Because we still have 40 million people in the US who don't have bank accounts, who are underbanked or underserved.
Yeah, and it's again probably the other most interesting policy choice around what a technology can enable versus what kind of standards and social and policy choices we'll make around it. If I extend it a little bit, your question or your comment, that certainly the remittance payment space. The remittance space is a big use case to be able to reduce the cost of remittance payments, and the U.S. as being the world's largest originator of remittance payments. Now, those payments are originating from, by and large, actually it's not entirely true. Many of those remittance payments are originating from people that fully participate in our financial services world. There is the ability, of course, to go into a Western Union or whatever with cash and initiate one as well. But so the cost of remittance payments, I think, helps from a social humanitarian perspective in terms of not charging what is an exorbitant a high fee for those that are least able to afford it or trying to do something good with it. On the other side, in terms of the choices that we'll make around what are those minimum standards of financial inclusion, and particularly the AML KYC checks that need to take place around it. Those are often prohibitive for people, for people on, who are not currently included in our financial ecosystem. Can the ability of this technology create a digital wallet construct into which someone could now have CBDC more cheaply? I think absolutely. I think there's some interesting things to talk about there. The ability to participate in online transactions, right? Today, if you don't fully participate, you might be able to go out. You might choose to go get a debit card and load it up with value, and then use that as a basis for online transactions. Could this make that simpler and easier? I think absolutely. But there's a floor that we will have to make choices around where it sits with respect to the need to essentially onboard, present a minimum level of documentation to satisfy AML KYC, and choices around, is there, do we change where that floor is and what those minimum requirements are? The potential is all there with the technology. The question is what kind of societal, legal, and regulatory choices we're going to be willing to make around it. So we're very focused on educating and sharing the tech, what the tech is capable of, to then inform those policy decisions.
Great. And then want to just ask a question here about federal versus state and cities. There are city tokens, city dollar, city fiat being created. There's a famous one, I think, Ducati currency in an Italian town. They've just started issuing. We know we have instances of this in the US as well. It's nothing new. What do you think about that? Do you think they're more short-lived projects, or do you think we'll just continue to see proliferations of this?
Well, that's where we've got a lot of interest and excitement around the interplay between, I'm going to call them stable coins and a central bank digital currency, right? Yeah. So CBDC, is a tokenized version of that currency that its value transcends context. A private issued coin or stable coin is being pegged to that, I think, is a powerful combination, because then you can add business logic. You can do much more creative, innovative things that you wouldn't choose to do with a central bank digital currency. So I think we'll see some really creative, innovative, innovation around that space. particularly around benefits distribution, right? If I thought about, think about how you could modernize the notion of food stamps, aid distribution, benefits distribution, I think incorporating business logic into that, the programmable nature of money there in the form of a private or even governmental stablecoin pegged to a CBDC, I think there's enormous creativity and value that we can apply and create there.
There's a question here regarding whether you think CBDC has been accelerated by COVID, and also where do you see CBDC going in the next couple of years?
So absolutely, it has been accelerated. Not necessarily in the way we anticipated per se in some cases. So again, in the US context, Chris Giancarlo and Daniel Gorfine and the rest of our team, we had spent a significant amount of time on Capitol Hill, just sharing thoughts and ideas and the constructs. And actually, thanks to the GBBC, and our work together to evangelize the capabilities over the past year with government, with the government stakeholders. I think we raised awareness. I think we didn't, the language that was used in the Sherrod Brown bill and then the CARES Act, and so what was being contemplated around the use of the notion of the term digital dollar and digital identity wallets isn't exactly what we're talking about in designing, and the digital dollar project itself is we're in the midst of finalizing our phase 1 white paper that we're offering up to the community, where we're going to clarify some of the language and what was meant. But on the upside, the discussions that it sparked and the interest in the debate, enormously valuable. I think that the challenge was in this moment, though, that we couldn't possibly implement quickly enough to be relevant for the these days and weeks, to be able to get the money to who needs it. So there was no choice in the current legislation to use the existing financial infrastructure to get money into people's hands very, very quickly. Hopefully, all of this conversation and focus will spark the building of capabilities that will make it different and better, as and when we have another similar need. Let's hope we don't.
Yeah, no, I hear you. There's a lot of, when you see the cracks in various aspects of what we can deliver easily, you wonder, well, too bad we didn't have this infrastructure before. Let's see, some interesting questions here. Is there a danger of having too many stable coins in the retail and wholesale markets? Do we have too many? Do you think we need to, that it's just sort of a, proliferation, and then eventually the ones that.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm all, I think markets work really, really well. So, if it has value and it has value to a community, it'll grow and thrive, and if it doesn't, it won't. So, there's a lot to be gained by by having the Cambrian explosion of innovation, and we'll learn and consolidate around the valuable pieces.
Great. And then here's a question from Charles Moore. The other one was from Olaf. How ready is the financial services ecosystem for a central bank digital currency, and what emerging new business opportunities do you see? And actually, that's a great one for the entrepreneurs who are listening. Where do you see the opportunities? But why don't you start with is the financial services sector ready for this?
Yeah, I think that. So I think they are. If I think back over the past couple of years worth of focus around utility settlement coin, JPMC coin, the Swiss exchange choice to build the SDX as a fully digital asset markets, the Project Ubin program that we worked on with the MAS in Singapore and the banks in Singapore. Ubin Jasper in Canada. There's been a wave of projects with a weighting certainly in capital markets where you can see some of the quicker value of being able to directly exchange tokenized assets versus tokenized cash and the value that's associated with that. Financial services has been in this game for a few years now,
right.
And all of which is gearing up to was essentially gearing up and creating the platforms that will benefit from having tokenized cash and central bank digital currency. So yeah, more than ready, they're building and busy re-platforming core financial infrastructure to take advantage of it.
Fantastic. And then for the entrepreneurs out there, where do you see the opportunity sets with regard to the eventual introduction of CBDCs and then how they fit into our world?
Yeah, as proud I am collectively for what we've all been, what we've all been innovating and creating. I think we're just at the beginning. I mean, I think we're at the beginning of the wave of innovation. I think we've sparked the core fundamental capability, and we've done enough to make it relevant enough, quality enough, secure enough. It's now reached a level of maturity that it makes it eligible to be used. I think we're just at the beginning, right? I would almost, sorry, I'm now sorry. I just triggered my Rolodex of talk tracks. An old one I haven't used in a long time. Right? It was like that first category killer cell phone. In the 90s. That it was the first one that we all carried around en masse. Right? It was the Nokia something. Had that little snake game in it. I can't remember now which number it was, but I think we've reached version 1s, right? Arguably, if the platform's on version 2s, but I think we're just at the beginning of this wave of innovation. I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be an entrepreneur in this particular space. We have a huge focus on reaching out to the entrepreneur startup community to partner and to support and to help, and it's a big focus of ours. And so I'm having a blast spending time with some really smart, much younger people than I am typically, with really creative ideas. So I think there's a lot of space, particularly in in secure, you pick your term, confidential compute, secure private compute, homomorphic encryption, et cetera. I think the hardware layer I think is interesting. Custody is really interesting. I think we're at the beginning of this wave of innovation. So I think it's very exciting times ahead for the entrepreneurs.
Well, I appreciate you giving such a positive comment regarding that, because I think there are a lot of entrepreneurs who are struggling right now and just trying to keep the lights on and survive, which, for the next 6 to 18 months, depending on how long we have to sort of scrape by. But if anyone is interested in contacting Accenture, should they contact you or someone on the team?
I am terrible on email, but yeah, go ahead and contact me, and I will do my best. You can also just go to our site. We've got various entry points, but yeah, I'm happy to field requests. I just can't promise I'm all that good about rapid responses. So sorry.
Understood. Or come through GBBC and we'll make sure to reroute it to Dave and the team, and we'll make sure that the proper emails get sent through. We're going to leave with a couple more questions, and then unfortunately we're going to have to close this out, but we really appreciate all the participation. I can't believe we're already coming up close to the hour. Dave, it's been very quick. We've covered a lot, and we didn't even touch supply chains that we'll have to save for another event, because I'm going to continue on the digital dollar conversation. There's one question here regarding the dollar's dominance in the world as reserve currency. What would a digital dollar do? Does it automatically mean that it, if it were successful, that we would retain, the U.S. would retain dominance or as reserve currency?
I guess I would pivot it around. If I were to pivot the question around, and if I looked out way into the future and said, what are the characteristics of the world's reserve currency, of a world reserve currency, it would necessarily have had to modernize to keep pace with our digital world, right? So I think it's inevitable that the reserve currency of the future needs to be in its most modern form and keep pace with the innovation space. And one that didn't, or one that didn't do that, I think would absolutely be at risk. I think that there are a lot of factors that go into to the dollar's position as world reserve currency. I think it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out and the dynamics of it. And it's not it's far ranging, right? We've been able to the stability that has been created by having a dominant, the stability that comes from having a dominant, reserve currency is enormously beneficial in terms of growth and you know, and global supply chains, et cetera, and how we price things globally and the stability of how markets grow. But is there a chance that the dynamics change over time? Absolutely, dependent upon you know, how quickly you know, modern technology is adopted and used. I guess I guess the other dimension that has been on my mind of late too is you know, the whole notion of global conflict and how that has changed over time. You know, I think it's incredibly positive. You know, obviously, you know, very complicated. I'm going to make a blunt statement that is far too blunt, and you know, this is a whole nother long topic. But you know, we've been able to shift the nature of global conflict from having you know war and military action be the primary mode and or the threat of it, to the financial sanctions and financial measures to be, you know, effective, you know, or ineffective, you know, depending on your frame of reference. So that whole notion of our global economy, the global interrelationships, again, I think it's really important to put those policy choices and the capabilities in the frame when we think about how we're modernizing our financial ecosystems. And this involves, you know, governments, it involves private industry, it involves consumer advocacy, consumer protection. It needs to involve a really diverse stakeholder group to make sure that we do it thoughtfully, and right, and you know, do no harm, and try to add real value.
Well, I have to say with that, you have rounded us out quite well, and it's very much the belief of the GBBC as well that this technology not only does not respect sovereign borders, but requires stakeholders across a vast group of different sectors and disciplines in order for this to work. And frankly, we need to keep working together, even in a world where people seem to be entrenching inward. So let's keep up the good fight, and everyone keep your optimism. If you ever need inspiration, go to Dave. He's our font of optimism, and we appreciate that because you know, blockchain pioneers and leaders like Dave are few and far between. And frankly, we thank you very much for everything you do in driving things forward.
No, and a big thank you to Sandra, you and the team. The GBBC has just been a massive partner for us, and we really appreciate the community that you've assembled, and it's an incredible, thoughtful group of innovators, entrepreneurs, social activists, humanitarians. It's phenomenal. So we're thrilled to be part of this community. I'll come back anytime you want me to.
Well, I think we have a lot more to talk about. Next installment, global supply chains, and maybe a bit more about where we see the rest of the world. I know we were a bit US heavy this time around, but we really appreciate it. The US has a lot of things to improve, a lot of room for improvement, as we've seen the last few months. Thank you very much. And Sophia, if you are still online, I will leave it to you to close out.
Great, super. Well, thank you so much, Dave and Sandra. This has been an excellent conversation, and thank you to everyone who tuned in to today's webinar. We will make a recording of this webinar available online shortly and send that link out to all of you. We also encourage you to join us next Tuesday for the next episode, which is May 12th at 9 a.m. with Richard Teng of the Abu Dhabi Financial Services Authority. You can also keep track of GBBC and GDF's activities online. I encourage you to visit us online, and I will also send out our social links after this. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Sandra. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.